Some things, they just pass you by. It is inevitable, especially as you get older. All the Kardashians for me are some sort of gestalt entity with like a mothership firing up clones of itself. Now, I've probably heard a Drake song, but I wouldn't actually be able to identify one for you. Some things, though, they really shouldn't pass you by because of age, because it turns out they've been around your whole life, longer than your life. I'm pretty sure a lot of us will remember that Prince Valiant was a short-lived cartoon, and it is indeed what this video is about. It's about the game based on the cartoon. But did you know it was a comic strip originally penned in 1937 and that it's still going to this day? What? Right? When did this happen? Anyway, it had a TV show which had an NES game. That is what you're pointing your silly face at right now, unless you're already looking at your phone or something already. That's just plain rude. So, Prince Valiant, as I've just talked about, is a comic strip, originally launched in the late 1930s. It was first published in the New Orleans Times, but found its way across the world's tabloids over the next few decades. Prince Valiant was the creation of Harold Rudolph Foster, an illustrator who cut his teeth on comic strips based on Tarzan in the 1920s. Prince Valiant tells the story of the young Nordic Prince Val, who leaves his homeland of Thule in the 400s to attend the court of Camelot. You know, good old King Arthur, Merlin, Lancelot, and that gang of made-up goofs. Certain historical events play into the narrative, such as the conquering antics of one Attila the Hun and the 455 sacking of Rome. That's 455 the year, not the time it happened. Although, having said that, its grip on history was a touch sketchy in other aspects. For instance, Prince Valiant travels the world, discovering America a good 1,000 years before Columbus. Columbus, you hack! The animation Legend of Prince Valiant arrived in 1991, giving the titular hero a mullet that somehow made him look a bit like peak era Vernon Kaye. It ran for 65 22-minute episodes, courtesy of King Features, who also did Defenders of the Earth. I'm not a particular fan of King Features, as they're a bit of a nemesis to me, as I had to hack my Spectrum games based on TV shows video on Defenders of the Earth because the bastards blocked it worldwide. Flash Gordon would not approve, you fucks. A few liberties are taken with the original comic. Not that that comic took a few liberties with Arthurian legend, so what's good for the goose is equally good for the mulleted Scandinavian swordsmith. Valiant teams up on a series of adventures with Rowan, the bow-totting blacksmith's daughter, and wandering peasant, and Pavel Nedved lookalike Arn, as they seek to put an end to the villainy of Mordred, King Sinan, Lady Morgana, and Dylan.
Dylan! You son of a bitch!
Prince Valiant wasn't afraid of the celebrity voice working circuit, with Uncle Phil stroke shredder himself, James Avery, dear old Tim Curry, and Skeletor voice actor Alan Oppenheimer in the main cast, and guest voices of the calibre of Michael York, Jonathan Rhys-Davies, Will Wheaton, Sean Astin, Patty Duke, and David Warner making an appearance or two when required. Truly, though, the most impressive thing, and probably most memorable thing about the whole show, was its theme tune, a proper early 90s MOR banger beloved by Larry Bundy Jr., which has aged like milk, really, in terms of modern music, but it was an extremely professional and well put together piece of music. Clearly, this show was told it was ending some way during production of the second series, with a few storylines either left dangling or massively hurried up towards the end. A shame, but such is the ruthless nature of early 90s syndicated American animation. There are 2 games published courtesy of British software house legends Ocean on the NES and the Game Boy, exclusive for us in Europe. Aren't we lucky? Well, I say exclusive, but the Game Boy title did come out the same year, with a quick license removal and a reskinned name of Kingdom Crusade, thanks to publishing company Electro Brain. And you know what? Nothing is sacred, because in 2019, Pico Interactive secured the rights to release the NES version in America. Boo! This time, it's Lancelot taking the lead role in Little Lancelot. Damn you! Can't we have this one thing to ourselves? It's not like the NES was popular over here or anything. Just let her have her own European title. The games are very different to each other. And let's first have a look at the game on the old lunchbox you had underneath your telly first. Naturally, you are Prince Valiant, and you must locate Tintagel, as this is but the start of the nobleman's journey. And being Cornwall, it's time to wade through swamps while being attacked by the locals. As you can tell, we're not looking at an exact recreation of the show's aesthetic here. This is no Aladdin on the Genesis, or to give it a more fair and just comparison, it's no DuckTales or Bucky O'Hare or Darkwing Duck either. It's not a looker, and that doesn't change throughout the course of the game. I mean, what is Prince Valiant throwing here? Saucepan lids? Any idea? Answer down below, or at least theorise in the comments. Best answer wins Tajikistan. Genuinely. Go there on a plane and tell them that you won. You'll be king there, I'm telling you. The first level is straightforward enough. It's left to right stuff, with the only real issue being how quickly the stepping stones sink. Boy, they go quick. How come they keep going up and down? That's not how stepping stones work. Game logic. Perfect timing is required, and that is something you'll definitely need later on in the game. You will encounter various dragons and beasts along with cutthroats, and then it's on to level 2 and a crossbow-based shoot-'em-up in the style of Operation Wolf. Some adversaries will drop power-ups to see you through to the next scene. It's fairly responsive, it's not particularly stunning, but it's a bit of variety, and you can't complain about that. Valiant finds a big mine filled with traps of the booby variety placed there by Vikings. My, it's all very Curse of Oak Island, isn't it? The game becomes a lot more platformy here, with Valiant going through a maze-like catacomb, dodging snakes, logs, bees and buzzsaws while whacking targets to open doors, battling ghosts and bears and avoiding falling masonry like he's in a 2023 British school. This is where the challenge intensifies. It's a long level, dripping in one-hit deaths on every screen. This bit is difficult with a D big enough to satisfy Sasha Grey. That's a pretty big D. From here we take to the high seas, which means I was wrong earlier and Valiant must have been in Thule, or Norway, at the beginning of the game. My apologies to the people of Cornwall. I have suggested that your area is covered in swampland. Enemy ships are determined to see the prince's vessel full of more holes than a 55-year-old virgin man's pants. You can rotate between the cannons on your ship's flank to take on the aggressive seafarers. It's a lot like the crossbow game, only you have to pitch the cannons to take down your foes, and this level is good clean beachhead style fun, but on your NES instead. The final level has His Royal Highness arriving in Camelot, where he is immediately taken as a threat and thrown in the dungeon. To prove his innocence, Valiant escapes and murders nearly everyone in the fabled keep. That'll go down well. It's another trap-laden maze level, but strangely not as laden with those there traps as the third level. It is a little bit longer though, and it's very easy to get lost in. You'll encounter knights, bowmen, a helpful Merlin, and eventually you'll end the game by bending the knee to King Arthur. King Arthur is impressed that you've killed most of his staff, and he puts you on a YTS scheme to be a Knight of the Round Table. And that's that. Prince Valiant on the NES is a game. Yes. It's overall pretty mediocre, but not offensive in any way, really. It's deeply frustrating at times, but it is mildly compulsive to play for a little while, even despite its murky, poor graphics. It is as underwhelming as the ending of its story. That distance just to kneel in front of a king. Brilliant. Ocean weren't the swaggering juggernaut of their 8-bit computer heyday at this point, but they still had the odd great game in them. You know, like the Addams Family series. But this isn't that. This is a fairly average NES game. Enforce reviewed it in the Christmas issue of 1992 and said it was an interesting game with average graphics and tough gameplay. They enjoyed the challenging and innovative combination of game styles. They said, however, the poor graphics are too frustrating to give the game long lastability. In the end, they gave it a score of 67%. Moving on to the Game Boy title, and for me, it's the better Prince Valiant game of the two. You're now a young adult Valiant with a fair amount of knightly experience and a command of Arthur's army. The tyrant Sinan is determined to take over Cornwall so he can fence off all the decent surfing areas, and Arthur thinks that he's had quite enough of these tourists taking over his beaches. Thank you very much. We're not in platformer territory here at all. Oh no. You start the game on a large grid. On that grid you have your kingdom in your chosen shade of Game Boy hued glumness, and your opponent's advancing army is in another shade of Game Boy hued glumness. Each square has different terrain and may depict castles or infantry. You will see your opponent move their characters into your territory, turning it into their shade of Game Boy hued glumness. You must select which of your army, usually the one closest to whatever objective you want to indulge in, to move. As soon as you click on a character, you can then move that character about in the environment in real time, with each flip screen representing one of the tiles on the battlefield board. You can find various power-ups in those battlefields to help power you up for your next battle or to help you heal from the previous one. Move to the next battlefield and that's the next square. If you're on a opponent's square when you walk through, then that becomes your territory. If you walk onto a screen an enemy is on at the same time as you are, well, it's time for a real rum-do. The different infantry attack in different ways, with wizards using ranged magic, Valiant using his sword, and the giant throwing rocks and swinging around his big old chain. Once you're out of the battle, you can then tap the start key and switch to another soldier, and then move him or her onto an enemy. There are two ways to win, either by wiping out all the enemies on the map or by conquering their castles, by capturing all the tiles around each one of those castles. This can be played at several difficulty levels, selectable map sizes, and it also has a 2-player mode, which actually must be a bit of a hoot. It's sort of a simplified medieval Star Wars Battlefront 2. And you know what? I quite like it. It's a cool concept, especially for a fairly throwaway cartoon show from the early 90s. I mean, perhaps it hasn't got a lot of longevity once you've played it through a few times. But for me, on my very brief playthrough, it's a valiant effort. Yeah, it probably deserved a better pun than that. Enforce, which always sounded to me like a 70s blaxploitation film about soldiers of fortune, happened to review the Game Boy Prince Valiant on the very same page as its NES brother. That saves on the graphics, doesn't it? They gave it, rightly, a higher score of 71% and said fans of the cartoon show should approve of this handheld version. There's lots to see and do, and some great sequences. So, Arthur, this video, was about a really good game, but there wasn't lots a lot wrong with the other title, to be fair. I just like the handheld Game-A-Lot more. Game-A-Lot, Camelot. God, that didn't work. Ouch. Anyway, we will be right near Halloween for the next episode, and while I'm saving the pug mask for the Weird Licenses video on the 31st itself, I think we should have a little taster and go back to a family we've visited before, but they're in a different show. It's the new Addams Family series on the Game Boy Color. Yes, apparently there was a Addams Family TV show in the late 90s that I didn't know about. Apparently it's not anywhere near as good as Wednesday on Netflix, But is the game fittingly horrible enough for the season of the witch? I'm sure it will be. Please join me then. But until then, like, subscribe, and Kaye, thanks, bye.